I'm Jonathan Tomkin from the University of Illinois. We've looked at a range of measures to help the Earth reach a more sustainable place. A lot of times we've considered technological changes, for example, by changing the sources of our energy. There's another way that we can look about making changes, or by bringing these technological changes about, and that's by making changes to policy. Good policy requires not just an understanding of the natural world, but also an understanding of the social world. That is, what makes people and societies function. One of the branches of science that examines this, a social science, is economics. So we will be using economics this week in conjunction with politics to look at what makes good policy. Now, I know that economics has a reputation in the minds of many who care about the environment. But here I'd like you to approach the concept of economics with the following frame in mind. Economics is a social science that studies the patterns and movements of goods and services, things that we all rely on, including food, energy, healthcare, and so on. As an academic discipline, it attempts to tell us what is going on, not what should be going on. Think about it the same way that we've been using ecology and climate science. It's a tool to help us plan better for the future. One of the ideas behind economics is that individual people want to do things that make them happy. This means that we form families and make friends, we go to jobs that let us earn money to buy things that we want. It means that we look for good food and shelter. This is sometimes called utility or welfare. In economics, utility is a representation of preferences over some set of goods and services. That is, we prefer some goods and services to others. And then we have an equation that we can use, is that the net benefit to us is all the benefits minus all the costs. So the idea in economics is that we want to maximise our individual benefit. We want to do things that make us happy. Let's take an example and see how this can go wrong. To a good approximation, individuals act like they want to maximise their own welfare or their own utility, i.e. their own happiness. For example, all else being equal, we prefer to be in a job that pays more rather than less. Or if there are two identical shirts for sale and one is blue and one is orange and we prefer blue shirts over orange shirts, then we would buy the blue shirt. Nobody is always maximising their own utility, but it does explain why we do a lot of the things that we do. Another way to talk about this is that we're trying to increase our welfare. That is, the benefits we gain from doing something minus the costs of that action. Remember that net benefits equation. You might not like to clean the kitchen, however, but the benefit of having a clean kitchen outweighs the cost of having to scrub the sink. For some people, having a clean kitchen is worth cleaning every day. For others, it's every week or every month, and for some, never. If having a clean kitchen is not important to you, you don't value it highly, or you value it less than the effort of cleaning the kitchen itself, it's perfectly rational and understandable that you wouldn't clean your kitchen. But what if you share this kitchen with other people? If you make it messy, everybody else has to share that mess. So you're okay, but your reasonable choice for you as an individual is bad for society as a whole. Now, you should be saying to yourself, I know this scenario. This is a tragedy of the commons. And there's another name we can call that. We can also call it, using the language of economics, which is to say, a negative externality. Before I explain that in more detail, let's take a more serious example. I drive a car. I need to purchase petroleum, so depending on where you live, that's either gasoline or petrol, for it to run. This costs me some money. I have to pay to buy the petrol. But for me, it's worth it. I lose some money, that's my net cost, but I gain the ability to move somewhere that I want to go. I gain transport. So my utility outweighs the costs. Similarly, the oil company is happy too, because although they went to some expense and effort to get the oil out of the ground and get it to the consumer, the cost for them doing that is lower than the amount of money that I gave them. So they also have a net benefit. The benefit, the money they get from me, outweighs the cost of all the effort of extracting the oil. So all is good, right? I'm happy, and in some sense some giant multinational company is happy. So if everybody's happy, then this is a good result. That's what a classic market reading of this transaction would say. But not so fast. As we know, when we burn fossil fuels, we create pollutants. One of these pollutants is carbon dioxide. When I release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, I'm changing the climate. For many people, this is a negative impact. In a sense, in fact, every time I drive my car, I'm injuring 7 billion people as well as every natural ecosystem on the planet. Not injuring them very much, but nevertheless, they are negatively impacted by my choice to buy petrol and drive my car. This negative impact on these people who are not involved in the transaction between me and the multinational oil company is called a negative externality. So they're external to the transaction and their impact on them is negative, hence negative externality. Not all externalities are negative. For example, I also have a rain barrel on the side of my house. This collects rain and I can use that rainwater to water my garden. It also lessens the runoff to going into the local sewer system. And so in that sense, it prevents some pollutants reaching their way into natural habitats. So this is actually a positive externality. I bought the rain barrel off somebody who sells rain barrels, so we were involved in the transaction. I gave him some money and he gave me a rain barrel. But everybody in my community benefits in a very small way from less runoff water polluting the stormwater drains. So this is called a positive externality. We'll be focusing on negative externalities in this course because that's another way to think about most pollutants. So does this mean that economics is unable to properly take into account market transactions? It turns out that it can account for it if instead of looking at the private benefits that maybe I receive from driving my car, if instead we look at total net benefits. So this is a sense where we do an account of everybody involved in the entire system. So now when I drive my car, what is the total net benefit? Now that I have a personal benefit, but also there is a negative impact on 7 billion people plus natural ecosystems. So if we define welfare as encompassing more than just the individual person, organisation or country and extend it to include everyone and everything in the system, we call this the total net benefit. So we can use this kind of accounting system to describe the tragedy of the commons as a case where the individual benefit is positive, but the total net benefit is negative. That is, if we take into account more than just the individuals associated with the market transaction, that is the person who owns the cows or the person who does the fishing, those classic examples, but to everybody in the system, the total net benefit is negative. In some sense, societies have increased their total net utility through development. Another way of thinking about this is that we're much richer than we were in the past. The quality of our food is much higher, we have better housing, we have better healthcare, we have better education. The jargon for this is that we are more efficient. By trading goods and services, we're able to specialise and we're able to allocate those goods and services to where they bring the most net welfare. An allocation is efficient if it maximises social well-being or welfare. So if we efficiently allocate resources, then we're maximising that social welfare. So by itself, efficiency is a good thing. We all want to maximise welfare in some sense, perhaps not at total exclusion of other things, but all else being equal, we would rather not just for ourselves to be better off, but we'd like everybody to be better off. So efficiency is a useful goal for any political process. Now, efficiency is an economist term, and note that it doesn't mean that this allocation is necessarily fair or just. There is plenty of evidence that markets are wonderfully efficient at allocating goods and services, but this isn't an economics course. You could argue that we should use markets as much as possible. You could argue that markets fail too often. Here, we will restrict ourselves to noting that markets sometimes fail to bring about this most efficient outcome. That is, the total social welfare is not always maximised by markets. This is called a market failure. What are some examples of that? Well, if you think back to tragedy of the commons, you can come up with many. So, for example, there's emissions to the atmosphere. Not just carbon dioxide, but plenty of other pollutants, things like smog or chlorofluorocarbons, destroying the ozone. There's particulate pollution. In many countries around the world today, the market transaction of industries making things for consumers hurt local residents by depleting the air quality. And we can think of much of China as a good example of that. Another more esoteric example is light pollution. If you're an astronomer, you're harmed by the fact that we have street lights and house lights and car lights and so on. Or if you think that an absence of light helps you get to sleep, when your neighbour has their outdoor light on all night, that's a negative externality. Another sort of pollution is sound pollution. If you live underneath a runway and 747s go over your head every 20 minutes, well, that's a negative impact on you. Or similarly, if someone drives past in their motorbike when you're trying to get your baby to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, that might be another case of a negative impact of sound pollution. So what do we do about these events where we have these, if you like, tragedy of the commons or negative externality events occurring? How do we reduce or mitigate these effects? In each case, an economist would describe a negative externality as a market failure. In other words, the market, which is supposed to bring about the most efficient transaction of goods and services, is not succeeding to maximise social welfare. And the reason is the environmental impact is not being taken into account by the traditional market mechanism. So remember how I buy petrol to drive my car? Well, by doing that, the traditional market mechanism is good for me and it's good for the multinational oil company, but it has a negative impact that is not in the accounting system anywhere. I don't pay somebody for the damage that I did to their environment. I don't pay a polar bear for the fact that there's less ice than there used to be. So what do we do about these forms of pollution? In each case, we would describe them as a negative externality, and negative externalities is a market failure. A successful market maximises social welfare because of the transaction. But by not taking into account the environmental effects, we are not maximising the social welfare in each of these cases. If we go back to the example of me driving my car, I buy petrol, I maximise my private welfare by going where I want to go. The multinational maximises their private welfare by increasing their profits. But society as a whole has to suffer the costs of the congestion of me on the roads, the particulate matter I might put into the local atmosphere, and the carbon dioxide I put into the global atmosphere. So how do we increase the net welfare and fix this situation, correct this failure? In many cases, tragedy of the commons and negative externalities are similar ideas and so have similar solutions. But by using this precise economic language, we can identify ways to fix the market failure in particular. Traditionally, this is done through policy. If we use good policy, we can actually increase the net social welfare. In other words, we can correct the market failure and make everybody better off. In the next lecture, we'll be looking at various environmental policies and see how they can correct this market failure.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.